Teaching is a complex process. The learning is also a complex process. Then the teaching learning takes place in the classroom, as all we know. So to deal this teaching learning process effectively, what to do, what not to do, when to do, how to do, who to do, this all we have to know. Then only we can make the teaching learning process effectively. Before going to this planning of teaching learning process, we have to recall the definition of teaching and learning. So we know that the activities which are planned in the classroom to perform by the teacher are exhibited by the students or the learner, or sometimes by both the teacher and the learner, is called teaching learning process. So the process in which the student and the teacher perform in the classroom are called teaching learning process. So to make this teaching learning process as an effective one, it is compulsory or necessary the teacher has to plan in advance. So to make the learning process as an effective one, the teacher has to pre-plan himself the activities what he has to exhibited or perform or demonstrated or visualize to the learner in the classroom to be carried out in the real life classroom situation. So to make the teaching learning process effectively, the teacher has to pre-plan the activities what could be carried out in the classroom situation, otherwise he cannot get failed. So to make anything effectively, the teachers have to plan in advance, otherwise we cannot plan, we cannot execute the plan effectively. So for effective outcomes, for good in outputs, we need to plan. The teacher has to plan to get the good outcome from the learners. So whatever the inputs given by the teacher, then only we can expect the good outcomes from the learners. So to get the good outcome from the learners, the teacher has to plan the activities in order to achieve the goals or objectives of his lesson in advance. Then only we can get the good results from the students. So the teacher has to plan in advance to achieve the objectives which are in designed earlier to the classroom. So we know that the teaching learning process is a two-way process, so it's not one way. So there should be the involvement from the students also in the teaching learning process. So if we look into the teaching learning process, the teaching learning process is involved with two processes. One is the teaching process and the second one is learning process. If we look at the teaching process, it is one-way process. That means the teacher teaches the things from the subject, whatever the content has to be taught to the students. He teaches in his own style. He cannot expect the answers or the feedback from the students. This is the one way. We can say this is the input process by the teacher. And if you take the second one, learning process, it is also a one-way process. We can say without the input from the teacher, we cannot expect the output from the learners. So it is also we can expect from the learners with the encouragement and motivation from the teacher himself. So both the process are involved. So we can say the teaching learning process is two-way, not the one way. So this is about the teaching learning process. How many processes are involved in we have seen. Now if you see the teaching and learning, we can see there are some essential components are involved in the teaching learning process. And what are the components, we will see in detail. What are the components are there in the teaching, and what are the components are there in the learning. We can observe the teaching as a process. We can see there are three components mainly. They are, first one is telling, second one is showing, third one is doing. And if you go to the learning process, it also is consisted with the three components. And the first one is listening, the second one is observing, the third one is performing. So if you that means in teaching learning process, the teaching has three components and the learning has three components. So we can say the components of teaching and learning process as six components. Totally they are teaching, showing, doing, listening, observing, performing. So the three components are related to the teacher, and the three components will be performed by the teacher. And if we come to the listening, observing, performing of learning, the components are related to the learner, and that will be performed by the learner himself. So there are six components should be covered in the teaching learning process simultaneously, parallelly. Then only we can expect the output, right output, or a good output from the student. So these six components should run parallelly to get the expected outcome or to reach the objective of the teacher of the content. So these six components, what we will discuss one by one, we will discuss about the each components of teaching and learning. If you take the components of the teaching, there are three components we have discussed already. What is teaching? What are the components? First one is telling, the second one is showing, and the third one is doing, we said. So if you take the first component, is what is telling? Telling is nothing but repeating the things or transmission of the words, vocabulary, facts, theorems, laws, generalizations, whatever it may be. The transmission of related content in the form of facts, theorems, principles, and generalizations will be transmitted to the learner by the teacher in a particular specific time. This is called telling. If we move to the second one, the second component is showing. Showing means the exhibition or visualization of the teaching learning material is known as showing, we can say. So showing is nothing but exhibition of the TLM or visualization of the TLM. Sometimes we can say both exhibition and visualize. So exhibition and visualization of the teaching learning material or learning sources, teaching learning resources, if you take such as charts, images, graphs, models. Sometimes we use all these things in combination of the related content by the teacher. This is called showing. So showing is nothing but exhibition or visualization of the TLM individually or combinedly, which is relevant to the content by the teacher, is known as showing simply. If you move to the third component of teaching, that is doing, we can say. Doing is nothing but is relevant to the skills. So demonstration of the activities, whatever it may be, by the teacher with examples to the related content by the teacher is called doing. So just in the first method, just he tells everything, he speaks with his words, he explains the facts, theorems, and all these things. In the second component, he shows what he will convey. In the third component, the teacher tries to do it or demonstrate to make the students to learn the things which are in the abstract to concrete. So these three components are very, very essential, and these are consistent with the process of teaching. So this is about the components of teaching. Then if we move to the learning components, there are also three components we have already listed out. The three components are first one is listening, second one is observing, the third one is the performing, we can say. So this simply we can say these are the reactions of the components, reactions to the components of the teaching, we can say. The listening, observing and performing are simply the reactions to the components of the teaching, we can say, by the learner. So these can be performed by the learner. So whatever the teacher tells, the content will be received by the learner purposefully here. So here the learner tries to get or tries to receive the content which is transmitting from the teacher will be received purposefully when the teacher is telling to the learner. So this is the first components, we can say. So whatever the words or facts with theorems are teaching by the teacher will be received by the learner. That is called listening here. If you take the second one, that is showing, here whatever the teacher is showing, the TLM charts, whatever the learner observes what the teacher is showing or exhibiting or visualizing to explain the concept or the topic or related content. This is called we can say this is in response to the showing by the teacher, the learner does this observation. And we move to the third one, that is performing. So simply we can say this is a action of the learner to the action of the teacher to the third component. In the third component of teaching, the teacher demonstrates the activities with some examples to the related content. Here the student, the learner performs or does actively the experiments or activities with the help of the teacher or following the teacher to learn the related content. So these are some components, we can say. So this teaching learning process is involved with 6 components, we can say. If you take this first part, that is teaching, that is having the 3 components: teaching, showing, doing. And the learning is involved with the 3 components: listening, observing and performing. So the teaching learning process is involved or consists with 6 components, namely telling, showing, doing and listening, observing. The last one is performing. So the teaching learning process is a cyclic process, we can say. If the learner is not satisfied with the activities done by the teachers, then the process will be goes on again by the teacher. So these are some essential components of teaching and learning. So we can conclude that why the planning and teaching learning is important means here to make the teaching learning process as effective by the teacher has to pre-plan with the activities which are going to perform by the teacher and the learner to be carried out in the real classroom situations. This is about the components and the process of teaching and learning. Then we will see how the planning of teaching learning helps the teachers in the real classroom situations.